these regular monthly meetings. You can use that phrase now with full confidence. With that shock news, I hand you over to Tom Luff, who will tell you about one of the 6 projects that Community Energy London are undertaking, and Tom is spearheading one on the wonderful world of community scale heat pumps. Tom, over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Simon. Thank you for that that introduction. I will attempt to share the content unless Catherine, you will present the slides. What's the best way?
I'm happy to do it for you. If you want.
If you can, then that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I got them ready.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks very much. My name's Tom Luff, and I've been working with a few community energy groups in London and focusing on how to decarbonise heating in particular. Previously, I was at Bayes doing stuff on renewable policy and electricity system policy. But today, although I'm the one presenting, we've got a small sort of project team of me and also Dave Powis, who I think is on the call as well, and also Mona Khalili. So really thanks very much to them for their continued work and input, and also supported very much by Syed and Catherine. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to talk through this new project, which is sponsored by the GLA, and it's into retrofitting heat pumps in community buildings. And we're at the very early stages of the analysis at this point. I just wanted to take you through our plans and give an opportunity for CEL members to be able to sort of input and give your thoughts. I'll start with the context of the project and then talk about some definitions. Then I'll talk through why we think it's important to focus on community buildings. I'll explain what we're planning to look at in relation to challenges and potential solutions, and then I'll sort of summarise some of the questions that we're welcoming views on. And just to say, although it would be great to have a discussion about this today, appreciate that people may prefer to sort of send views in afterwards. So I'll give an email address to do that at the end. So moving on to the next slide, there's been huge effort and progress in relation to installing renewable power systems already. And this has been, I think this has been probably one of the major focuses of community energy groups to date. But looking ahead, when it comes to further emissions reductions and further work that's needed, heating is going to be increasingly important. And about 90% of energy to heat London's buildings is from natural gas. And natural gas accounts for about 37% of London's carbon emissions. So it really won't be possible to meet our climate targets without changing the way we heat our buildings. Also, and it's so all too relevant right now, but depending on gas for our heating is very dangerous from a price and sort of security perspective. And the chart here just shows that gas prices have increased fourfold over the last year, and they remain volatile. So there's really great potential for community buildings, we think, to contribute to solutions in this space. But to date, they've tended to be left out of the picture. And I think we found that community buildings fall between or risk falling between the cracks of existing government support schemes. And the aim of this project is to help ensure that they can be prioritised. CEL successfully bid for funding from the GLA for a small project to explore the role of community buildings in retrofitting heat pumps. And we've got 3 sort of chunks of this. One is sort of setting out the scale of the opportunity. So what community buildings are there in London? How much energy can be decarbonised in relation to heating of them? Then number 2 is understanding the challenges that hinder the scope for community buildings to be retrofitted with heat pumps. And then thirdly, looking at potential solutions to these challenges. And overall, we hope to conclude the work shortly after summer, probably early in the autumn. If we go to the next slide, in terms of definitions of community buildings, we aim to be pragmatic and flexible. We don't think that there's a hard and fast definition of what we mean by community buildings, but we plan to focus on buildings in particular that are used, primarily for community activities, and those that are accessible to the public. And we're not looking really at residential buildings, and we're not really looking at commercial buildings. But obviously there are going to be some sort of grey areas in the definition. But as I said, we'll aim to be sort of pragmatic in relation to that. But we would expect some of the kind of groups of buildings to include community centres, libraries, leisure centres, places of worship, but there may well be others. We're not initially planning to focus on public buildings that are currently eligible for the public sector decarbonisation fund, and that might include sort of schools and colleges. But that said, we do recognise that those buildings are very important, and there may be scope for partnerships going forward where community energy groups can get involved to support those buildings to get or to decarbonise their heating systems. So our analysis is going to focus on at least two case studies, and we're currently kind of gathering information in relation to those. So thanks very much to those contributors. Crew Energy. So I saw Toby's, saw Toby's on the call, and this is in relation to the project in Battersea, the Devas Youth Club, where Crew successfully installed air source heat pumps. And also we're looking at the work that Powering Up North London has been doing in relation to the Caxton House Community Centre in Islington, and that's involved so far kind of significant fabric improvements, but also feasibility studies for heat pumps going forward. If we just move on to the next slide, so we're planning to sort of unpack and sort of set out benefits to community buildings of heat pump retrofit, and I've already this sort of sets out some of the benefits that we've kind of thought about. We'll expand and develop this, and I've already talked implicitly about the kind of carbon and potential cost saving benefits. The cost saving benefits, particularly in relation, which are possible so long as the right kind of interventions are made. Additionally, we think there could be other benefits in relation to community buildings demonstrating heat pump technology, and the aim could be about inspiring greater take up across the community of heat pumps into the future. And also, we think that in a world of high and volatile energy prices, there could be a role for community organisations to offer a warm space for people in the community, and we sort of think that pioneering investments to ensure that they can provide affordable heating when needed could help achieve this. So we'll develop this thinking a bit more about sort of the benefits.
Tom, just to add one point to that.
Yeah.
Air quality. So there's less gas flow emissions, less particulate matter, NOx, carbon dioxide.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. And actually, just to say, so thanks very much for that. And we'll sort of pause. I'll take a breath at the end, and we'll come back. And so, by all means, think of this as a brainstorm in terms of other suggestions that people have. I'll just quickly move on to the next slide, which is about challenges, and we'll be exploring challenges and developing sort of a list of those challenges during the course of the project, drawing on the materials we gather from the case studies and the learning that's been gathered through those. An initial take on areas to consider, I've listed out here, but sort of focusing on these areas in particular so far. So as a relatively, although the technology is well established, it's not something that heat pumps are not well deployed already in the UK, and so especially relative to conventional technologies, gas boilers, little is many people don't know much about them. So there's an informational gap, we think. There's also, we think, something about agency and who is best placed to lead projects, given that it might involve multiple players to be, and also sometimes the kind of trying to understand, what could drive participants to take the lead. There could be technical challenges, crucially about kind of what work is needed and what in terms of sequencing, what needs to come first, such as fabric improvements to improve energy efficiency. And then also potentially significant challenges around financing. Unlike I've mentioned before, but unlike other sectors, there's no explicit central government support for community projects to decarbonise heat, since the non-domestic RHI has now is now closed. So although other grants are available, particularly at the local level, sometimes navigating these can be hard. So kind of there's a bunch of challenges there. And then just finally, on the last slide, sorry, the next slide, but this one, yeah. We will explore some potential solutions to these challenges. And so we again, sort of early thinking, but providing information, sort of talking to the powers that be about grants that extend to community projects, support in relation to structuring finances and how to do that in a way that community groups can finance these projects. Perhaps templates around how to go about the process and learning from other successful projects. There could be capacity building opportunities and also sort of innovative solutions, such as kind of time of use tariffs and stuff like that. Then finally, if we move just finally onto the last slide, I've kind of summarized some of our questions in relation to what we're looking in particular for kind of input on. I'll list through these just as a summary, but basically interested in an understanding about the definition that we proposed in terms of community buildings. Any kind of further thoughts on that? Anything around examples of community heat projects from across London or more broadly? I think other thoughts about benefits for the take up of community heat, and we just heard a good suggestion just now, and then thoughts about challenges and solutions. But as I say, if by all means, suggest things now, but there will be a limited time in this session, so we'd really welcome views sent through. And I don't know if you can see it there, but I've got it's Catherine's email address, and so views sent in through there to Catherine would be really, really welcome as well. I'll stop there, and I suppose open up to questions if there's time for that. So I'll look back to Syed and see how we're doing for time, and are we okay to have a bit of discussion now?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for that. Giovanna, you and I'm sure Toby, you wanted to say something a bit further, but Giovanna, you go ahead first, please.
So I suppose this is a little bit of a comment. It's always slightly done my head in that we as a community energy sector have never developed a package of measures for solar that includes a financial model, a standard lease agreement, a set of slides to show to partner, basically a pack of tools that we share and we refine together. That's one thing about cooperatives that we really should do, is cooperate with one another to support one another in different geographical areas. I'm just wondering whether this project can do that for heat pumps. I'm currently having to do that. I've got funding for a heat pump and solar project. One of them's going to include heat pumps on a swimming pool in Bromley, and I'm currently having to go through the process of developing all that shebang all myself, all on my Todd. And in many ways, that is more valuable than a policy-focused report. Because actually, the one thing we know about renewables, it is so context-specific, and the only way you understand the challenges is by blooming well going and doing it, and then discovering, oh my God, land access rights are a problem for water source, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess that's a plea. Can it focus very much on the development of the toolkit rather than on development of a sort of policy report on what in theory is a good idea. Happy to cooperate. I'm wrestling with the old heat pump thing right now, and I'm really happy to cooperate to support you, and in turn perhaps get some of your smarts. Oh, and one other thing, Toby wrote a rap about building management systems. You must include that in whatever report.
Tom, you want to respond and then Toby come in?
I will do. So firstly, that's really welcome, and thanks for the offer of support. And if we can work through with you a little bit in real time, probably wouldn't be kind of a case study, but could be really, really helpful in terms of understanding the challenges in real time. And in terms of toolkit, I think definitely that's kind of in many ways the purpose of what we're trying to do. How kind of sophisticated that toolkit is, whether we have something that's fairly sort of high level as an output for this, but say actually that should be developed into a proper toolkit as a next step, or whether we can go the whole hog and do something, I think it remains to be seen. But certainly the sort of something that gives people or sort of sets out, this is what we think needs to happen when you're developing a project like this, we think will be part of the project.
Just to say, Giovanna, we've got the genesis of a toolkit on the Cell webpage, in the sense that we've got a checklist of things you need to think of. It's nowhere nearly sophisticated, but the idea always was to try and build up to something that you want. So what Toby and also Dave Powers will be supporting us in this project as well is building up that knowledge, and then hopefully we can gear up to something along the lines of what you're talking about. And like you're saying, it's so site specific, but on solar, just to say that on the Cell webpage, you might remember Andre Pino from Repowering developed a really sophisticated spreadsheet of issues that you need to consider for a solar project. And that's been downloaded quite a bit and was quite well regarded. It probably needs updating, but it allowed people to input their own data, and it gave them a fairly good kind of way of getting some estimate.
Yeah, I mean, but that's far from being a financial model, and that's a huge part of the effort of doing these projects. And in fact, our projects are not sufficiently different that each single group has to spend 2 weeks developing their own flipping financial model. It's a ridiculous waste of time. We could do this by cooperating. Yeah. Okay.
Project team, take note. Toby, I think. Well, before we go to Toby, hold on. There's just give it your take. Actually, Sydney is saying it, and I think Toby's responded about why we didn't include ground source heat pump. You want to give a quick comment on that, Tom?
Yeah. So I think ground source heat pump could be a good solution for certain sites. However, for the purpose of this project, we think that we're going to get more bang for our buck by focusing on air source, given that we're focusing on London. That's not to say ground source can't work in London, because I'm sure that there are sites that it can work, but we just think that the vast majority of sites will be more likely to be supported by air source. I know it's a very controversial topic, but actually, we're just prioritizing really in this one.
Okay, Michael makes a point about we need a fabric first approach first. That's very much built in, embedded in our thinking as well. Michael, Toby?
Yeah, what can I say? Just on Sydney's thing about ground source. So those boreholes are typically, so if we look at Kenza, I think they're about 8 to 10 metres apart so that you don't start creating permafrost. If they go 70 metres, which a lot of their ones do, you're getting around about 18 kilowatt hours of heat out a year. So you need quite a lot of boreholes because of the space. There is other technology like Erda, where they use coaxial tubes and then they can go off angles, so they can be much closer to the top. They go a whole lot deeper, they go to about 250 metres. So, and each one of those will have about 3 times the heat per metre than a Kenza standard G-tube borehole. But the issue, Sydney, is if you look at something like Enfield, that project with Kenza, each of those properties come out around about 16,500 per flat. It's just crazy expensive, and when you're only getting, let's say you use the building upgrade scheme, you get 5,000 if it's an air source, you get 6,000 if it's a ground source. It's just no incentive to go ground source. So essentially, that policy has killed ground source in Britain. I'd argue there's a debate that the ground source heat pump associations have that this isn't an installation of a heat pump. This is an installation of a piece of infrastructure. So you should look at it differently. You should put that on an 80-year horizon. But no one's looking at 80 years ahead, so I don't really get that argument. So I think we'll mainly be looking at air source. And just a bit about cooling. You can reverse an air source heat pump and cooling as well. Now remember, it's not air conditioning though. That is cooling water down to about 5 degrees. So when it's blowing over you, it would be about 14, whereas air conditioning is blowing over you at about 5 degrees. So it's cooling air rather than cold air.
Okay, thanks for that.
Just one other bit. I've finally finished the 11-page report. There is a lot. I've tried to put a lot of stuff in there that are pointers. So this talk that we're talking about, I think quite a lot can be extracted from that and put into a briefer document as a sort of starter for 10 type thing.
Okay, some interesting things in the chat column there. Paul's mentioned a ground source in Brockwell Park. Tanu just mentioned about the cost differential between air source and ground source, about 2.5 times more. Yes, Mike, boreholes can be a problem in London. There's a bit about extraction of water. But I do remember many years ago, the largest ground source heat pump in Europe at the time, 2010, is in one new change, which is the offices and shopping centre opposite St Paul's Cathedral. And I know because I went to go and see the boreholes being developed at the time. I was amazed. It's literally just a stone's throw from St Paul's Cathedral. But if you Google it, one ONE rather than the number one new change in ground source, you'll see that. Thanks, Paul. I know that you have to go. And Pamela's mentioned about, she thinks there's some boreholes of hot water at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I think London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine is also on the UCL district heating scheme. So there might be a number of different prime movers there for heat. Sydney, go and you jump in, please.
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, there was also some, well, Tom put in his presentation that the BUS is not eligible for non-domestic, but I thought it was for small buildings, and there's some comments in the chat from people who also think that it's eligible for.
Yeah, sorry, I just jumping in. Sorry, I've misrepresented. I think it's more about suitability. So if your community building is relatively large, or at least larger than your average house, which is most likely to be the case, given that you get £5,000 for the boiler upgrade scheme, it's unlikely to plug the gap that you need to make up the difference with paying for a conventional boiler. So I think it's more about suitability, and there's not a scale up in relation to size. What I've not actually explored is whether you could do some kind of workaround and just install a whole, a series of smaller heat pumps and get a multiple subsidies. But I imagine, I would expect that's not going to be possible.
Yeah, I mean, some community spaces are quite small, I would say, so it's worth definitely considering. And the comment about installation first is relevant as well.
Thanks
okay,
for
thank
that.
you.
Yes, the Waltham Forest, I think Michael's going to come back in the chat column. I think that was the Eco House project. Mike Smythe, you've mentioned about the Kingston project. I remember that. I think that one unfortunately came a cropper. So you don't mention, you don't see that one mentioned. That was I believe what they call in the trade slightly over-engineered project in Kingston, but saying that there are a number of other heat pump projects which are canal side, I think. So, the heat pumps are a bit hit and miss on some non-domestic projects. And I think part of what we're doing is trying to build the tools, as Giovanna's asked, also get an idea of the evidence base, and then utilize that in terms of both London government, boroughs, and also central government. Okay, if there are no further questions, Tom will be, canvassing members about anything on, on heat pumps. Tom won't be possibly with us with the whole of the project. So if you've got issues that you want to raise, can you send them to Catherine in the first instance, and we'll make sure they get to the right team member. So if you've got issues that pop along with heat pumps that you suddenly remember about this project and you want to flag up, let Catherine know. Tom, thanks very much. Tom,